Thanks for watching this video from the Bible Fulfilled. My name is Alex Polyak. I am the director of the Bible Fulfilled, and today I'm going to be talking about Daniel 7 verse 13 to 14. I've actually already talked about this topic in other videos, but I wanted to add a few points for clarification, so I thought I'd make this video. Okay, so Daniel 7 verse 13 to 14 is a prophecy about the Son of Man coming on clouds to the Ancient of Days. And by the way, the Ancient of Days refers to God. So many Christians say that when Daniel said that the Son of Man would come to the Ancient of Days, it's referring to Jesus' ascension. And by the way, if you don't know, Jesus' ascension happened 40 days after his resurrection. Jesus died, then rose from the grave 3 days later, and then ascended to heaven 40 days after that. So Jesus' ascension happened in approximately the year AD 33. So some Christians say that when Daniel 7 mentions the Son of Man coming with the clouds to the Ancient of Days, Daniel was referring to Jesus' ascension in the year AD 33. And the reason they say this is because the passage says that the Son of Man will come on clouds to the Ancient of Days. So they see that as, Jesus ascending upwards like he did in the Ascension. But I don't agree with that view. I think Daniel 7 is referring to Jesus' cloud coming in the year AD 70. A cloud coming refers to judgment, by the way, and I'm going to talk about that more in a second. So my view is that this judgment, this cloud coming, happened in the year AD 70 when Jerusalem and the temple were destroyed. So that is my view on Daniel 7. So again, the two views. One is that Daniel 7 refers to Jesus' ascension. The other is my view, which says that Daniel 7 verse 13 to 14 was talking about his judgment in AD 70. By the way, the reason this topic is so important is because those who say that Daniel 7 is referring to Jesus' ascension also point out that Jesus was quoting from Daniel 7 in the Olivet Discourse, like in Luke 21, for example. After all, both Daniel 7 and the Olivet Discourse, of course, mention the Son of Man coming on clouds. So it's the same event, obviously. So if the cloud coming in Daniel 7 is about the ascension, then so is the cloud coming in the Olivet Discourse. And if this were the case, it would have huge eschatological ramifications because, as many theologians have pointed out, how one views the Olivet Discourse will decide one's eschatology. So this is a really important topic. So who's right? Does Daniel 7 verse 13 and 14 refer to Jesus' ascension in the year AD 33, or does it refer to the judgment of Jerusalem in AD 70? So that's what I'm going to talk about in this video. Okay, so let me start by reading the passage. And by the way, Daniel gave this prophecy about 600 years before the time of Jesus. And here's what Daniel prophesied. I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom the one which shall not be destroyed. So again, this is Daniel 7 verse 13 to 14. So Daniel prophesied that one like the Son of Man would come with the clouds of heaven to the Ancient of Days, to God, and then he would receive the kingdom. So again, like I say, some commentators believe that this is referring to Jesus' ascension because, Daniel said that the Son of Man would come to the Ancient of Days, just like when Jesus ascended from earth to heaven. But again, I disagree with that view, and here's why. I'm going to give 3 reasons. The first reason is this. As I already pointed out a second ago, Jesus quoted from Daniel 7 in the Olivet Discourse. And by the way, I think all theologians would agree with that. There's nothing controversial there. And when we compare what Jesus said in the Olivet Discourse to what Daniel said in Daniel 7, we see that they both mention the very same topics, or the very same elements. Both Daniel and Jesus talk about the Son of Man coming on clouds in glory with the kingdom. So this is obviously the same event. And by the way, just about all theologians, I've never heard of a theologian who would disagree with that. But here's the key. When did Jesus say that this event would happen? To answer this question, let me give a quick overview of what Jesus said in Luke's account of the Olivet Discourse. So the Olivet Discourse starts out in Luke 21, verse 6, by Jesus saying that the temple would be destroyed. Not one stone would be left upon another, Jesus said. Then in verse 7, the disciples ask Jesus when this event would happen. And then Jesus mentions, the various precursors, such as false messiahs, nations rising up against nations, the persecution of Christians. Then Jesus goes on to say in verse 20 that Jerusalem would be surrounded by armies. And then this would indicate that the city's destruction was near. And then Jesus said in verse 27 that they would see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of glory. So according to Jesus, the coming of the Son of Man doesn't happen until after Jerusalem is surrounded by armies, after which the city is destroyed. But Jerusalem wasn't surrounded by armies until 30 years after Jesus' ascension. The first century historian Josephus specifically describes the army surrounding Jerusalem in his book called the War of the Jews, and he said it happened just prior to Nero's death in the year AD 68. So Jerusalem wasn't surrounded by armies until the year approximately AD 67, which was about 30 years after the ascension. And then after this, the Son of Man comes on clouds of glory according to Jesus. So there's no way this cloud coming refers to Jesus' ascension. Again, Jesus said this cloud coming would happen after the armies surrounded Jerusalem, yet Jerusalem wasn't surrounded by the Roman armies until about 30 years after Jesus' ascension. Then, after Jerusalem was surrounded by armies in the year AD 67, then the Son of Man came on clouds of judgment in the year AD 70, when the temple and the city of Jerusalem were destroyed. So this cloud coming specifically is linked to the destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple, which happened in the year AD 70. And that's what a cloud coming refers to, by the way, a judgment. In fact, God the Father came on clouds many times in the Old Testament, and it refers to judgment. You can see examples of this in Isaiah 19, verse 1, or Ezekiel 32, verse 7 to 15, or Psalms 18, verse 7 to 17. I'm not going to look those passages up, but if you're interested, look them up. Or I actually have a video about cloud comings called What is a Coming of the Lord? I'll put a link to that video in the video notes below. But as I show in that video, a cloud coming refers to judgment. And the cloud coming / judgment that Jesus was talking about in the Olivet Discourse happened in the year AD 70. This is when, the city of Jerusalem and the temple were destroyed. And remember, this is the topic that started the discussion in the Olivet Discourse. Remember, in Luke 21, verse 6, Jesus said that the temple would be destroyed. Then the disciples asked when it would happen. And then Jesus gave all those precursors, like the army surrounding Jerusalem. And then Jesus said the Son of Man would come on clouds of glory. So, by the way, Jesus also said all these things would happen within a generation in verse 32, which equates to about 40 years, which fits perfectly with, the event happening in AD 70. That's exactly when the temple and the city of Jerusalem were destroyed, 40 years after Jesus said it would happen, within a generation. So this cloud coming / judgment happened in the year AD 70. And since Jesus was quoting from Daniel 7, in the Olivet Discourse, as all theologians acknowledge, then Daniel 7 must be about this event also. So that's point 1. Okay, now let me move on to point 2. Another reason that we can be sure that the cloud coming described in Daniel 7, verse 13 to 14 does not refer to Jesus' ascension in AD 33 is because this event would happen after the persecution of the saints, which did not begin until after Jesus' ascension. It's interesting that Daniel 7, verse 13 to 14 says the Son of Man would come on clouds to the Ancient of Days and receive the kingdom. But then, 2 verses later, Daniel says he's confused about this prophecy, so he asks the angel who gave him the prophecy to explain it to him. And here's what verse 21 to 22 say. I was watching, and the same horn was making war against the saints and prevailing against them until the Ancient of Days came, and a judgment was made in favor of the saints of the Most High, and the time came for the saints to possess the kingdom. So Daniel says that the horn was making war against the saints until the Ancient of Days came. By the way, it's interesting that in verse 13, Daniel says that the Son of Man would come to the Ancient of Days, but in verse 21 to 22, he says that the Ancient of Days would come. So as many commentators have pointed out, even some ancient Jews, by the way, have noted this, that Daniel is equating the Son of Man to the Ancient of Days. That's a topic for another day, but I thought I'd just point that out. That it's interesting that Daniel is equating the Son of Man to the Ancient of Days. So the passage says that the beast was making war against the saints, or in other words, the beast was persecuting the saints until the Ancient of Days came in judgment, and then the saints would possess the kingdom. So the war with the saints, or the persecution of the saints, happens prior to the cloud coming. But there was no war with the saints prior to Jesus' ascension. The persecution of the saints did not begin until after Jesus' ascension, when the apostles went around, preaching Jesus' resurrection and that Jesus was the Messiah. This is when the persecution began, after the ascension. And this war on the saints intensified just before the destruction of Jerusalem, when Emperor Nero unleashed the Roman soldiers on Christians. It's interesting that prior to this event, the Romans actually protected Christians from Jews. You can see examples of this, for example, in Acts 23, verse 12 to 22, and John 18, verse 31. The Romans just saw Christians as, just another Jewish sect. They didn't know the difference. Since Judaism was illegal, they protected the Christians against the Jewish persecutors. But then, in around the year AD 64, Nero burned down the city of Rome so he could remake it to his liking. And he needed a scapegoat, somebody to blame it on, so he blamed it on the Christians. They were the perfect scapegoat. After all, the Jews already hated them, so they would make the perfect scapegoat. Nobody would complain if the Christians were getting persecuted. So after this fire, Nero then unleashed his soldiers on the Christians. And then the Romans turned on the Jews too and destroyed their city of Jerusalem and the temple in the year AD 70. So this was the Son of Man coming on clouds of judgment, or on clouds of glory. So the coming of the Son of Man is linked to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. And again, this was 30 years after the ascension, after Jesus' ascension. Okay, so that's point 2. Now, one more point. Still another reason that we can be 100% sure that the cloud coming described in Daniel 7 does not refer to Jesus' ascension is that this cloud coming was still future when Revelation was written in approximately the year AD 65. Here's what Revelation 1 verse 7 says. Behold, he is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even they who pierced him. So this is the same cloud coming mentioned in the Olivet Discourse, and it's also the same cloud coming mentioned in Daniel 7. And Revelation wasn't written until approximately the year AD 65, which was around 30 years after Jesus' ascension. And Revelation said that this cloud coming was still future. So it had not happened yet, although it would happen soon, because Revelation said that the events written about in Revelation would happen soon, for the time is near. You can read this in Revelation 1, verse 1 to 3, and Revelation 22, verse 6 to 10. So this cloud coming in the year AD 65 had not happened yet, but it would happen soon. So this fits perfectly with the judgment a few years later in AD 70. So the cloud coming is linked to the judgment of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple in AD 70. So it has nothing to do with Jesus' ascension in AD 33. Now, there's a common objection related to this Revelation passage that people sometimes bring up, and it's this. The passage says, "Behold, he is coming with clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him." So many people get hung up on this phrase, "every eye will see him." Many Christians think that this means that every single person who has ever lived and ever will live will witness Jesus' cloud coming. So they say it could not have happened yet. My response is this. Notice that the passage says, "Every eye will see him, even those who pierced him." So what this passage is saying is that those who pierced or crucified Jesus would witness this event. In other words, it would happen within the lifetimes of those people who pierced or crucified Jesus. And that's exactly what ended up happening. Jesus came on clouds of glory in AD 70, which was within the lifetimes of those people who pierced or crucified Jesus. Some of those people who crucified Jesus were still alive to witness this event. By the way, for more information about this passage, I have an entire video about Revelation 1 verse 7 called "Every Eye Will See Him Coming." I'll leave a link to that video also in the video notes below if you're interested. So this event that Revelation 1 verse 7 is talking about, this cloud coming, happened in the year AD 70. Okay, now one more objection I want to go over, and it has to do with the directional travel of Jesus's body. As I mentioned earlier, some people say that when, Daniel 7 mentions the Son of Man coming to the Ancient of Days, it is referring to the Ascension. And the reason they say that is because they say the Son of Man is coming to the Ancient of Days. So he's going, it seems to match the Ascension when Jesus ascended from earth to heaven or from earth to God. My response is this. I don't think that's what Daniel's referring to. When Daniel said that the Son of Man would come on clouds to the Ancient of Days, Daniel was referring to the Son of Man's vindication and glorification, not the directional travel of Jesus's body. When Jesus came on clouds in AD 70, this proved once and for all that Jesus was who he claimed to be. It was a elevation in his status, as it were. Jesus came the first time as a man, but he came the second time as God, as the Son of Man, as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So I think that's what the term "coming to the Ancient of Days" refers to. It refers to Jesus's vindication and his glorification. He came the first time as man, he would come the second time as the King of Kings, as God. Jesus also talked about this in another passage in Matthew 16, verse 27 to 28. Jesus said the Son of Man would come come in the glory of the Father. Here's what he said in this passage. He said, "For the Son of Man will come in the glory of the Father with his angels, and he will reward each according to his works. Surely I say to you, there are some standing here who shall not taste death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." So Jesus said that the Son of Man would come in the glory of the Father. In other words, Jesus would come in the same way that the Father had come numerous times before, in Old Testament times. In other words, Jesus would come in glory, in vindication, in judgment, just like God, the same way that God came in the Old Testament. Again, Jesus came the first time as a man, but he would come the second time in the glory of the Father. In other words, he would come the second time as God, as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So I think that's what Daniel 7 is referring to when it says the Son of Man would come to the Ancient of Days. So for these reasons, I think there are just so many reasons that Daniel 7, verse 13 and 14, that cloud coming is referring to the judgment in AD 70. It has nothing to do with Jesus' ascension. It just doesn't fit historically, it doesn't fit scripturally, so I think it certainly refers to the judgment in AD 70. Okay, so that is it for today. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please do me a huge favor, hit the like button. Also, if you want to be notified of new videos, hit the subscribe button. And for more detailed discussion of the topics that I talked about in this video, get my book called The End is Here, How the New Testament's Prophecies Were Fulfilled. I go into much more detail about these topics and much more. I mean, I talk about things like the New Jerusalem, the Kingdom of God, the infamous 666 Antichrist. In fact, I have a whole chapter on the book of Revelation, so if you're interested in eschatology or if you know somebody who is, get my book. It is available on Amazon. Also, I have a bunch of free articles and videos on my website, 𝗏𝐵ibleFulfilled.com, so you can check that out too if you're interested. Okay, so thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.